Communications are meant to serve as a respite, aren't they? Really, I needed one recently. Life has been really tough. I still haven't signed the divorce papers that are on my kitchen counter, and I'm hanging on to my work by a thread because of the company's reorganization. I therefore plan to go to Hawaii, soak up some rays, and ignore my inbox for a while. It was just me, attempting to put myself back together on an unknown shore. While everyone else ignored me, it was a chore in and of itself to find the perfect airbnb. The majority of establishments were either incredibly expensive tourist traps or utterly miserable shacks posing as rural getaways. After then, I stumbled onto it. Cheap coastal home with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, just $100 for the whole night, hardwood flooring, an open floor plan, and windows that seemed to go on forever were all featured in the listing's professional photographs. While there were no current reviews, the ones that were there were positive and scarce. In my mind, it was too wonderful to refuse. Perhaps something good has come my way from the cosmos. This whole booking thing happened rather fast. You will receive an instant confirmation and check-in instructions. There will be no back and forth with the host. Something wasn't right then. But being desperate makes you lose your sense of intuition. The plane I took out of O'Hare left on a Wednesday. I gripped the armrest tightly as we endured the seemingly lengthy airline flight, complete with wailing infants, an inconsolable man, and turbulence. Having relied solely on airport coffee and the prospect of tranquility for energy, I was exhausted by the time we landed in paradise. I was given a beat-up Civic that had been through a lot from the rental car agency. Something in the engine was making a disturbing clicking noise, and the air conditioner was more noisy. Then it cooled. Just the fact that it shifted was sufficient. It all began with a rather ordinary drive to the airbnb, standard fare for vacationers. Sun-kissed tourists posing for selfies among palm trees and beaches. As I continued to follow the GPS further onto the island, though, things began to alter. Pavement gave way to gravel and the roadways shrank. A verdant tunnel emerged from the thickening tropical jungle, as if it were trying to engulf my car. For a terrifying second, I believed I had totally lost the GPS signal when it flickered. Nonetheless, it reappeared. I was led by a robotic voice along a twisting road that clearly hadn't been maintained for years. The GPS said you had reached your destination, and I turned off the engine. I felt a knot in my stomach as I beheld the house in front of me. I want to be clear, it looked just like the pictures. A charming seaside cottage with white trim, worn blue siding, and a wraparound porch that likely provided breathtaking views of sunsets. Although I sensed an oddity, like eyes observing my every action, the windows appeared to be staring back at me. As it fluttered among the palm trees, the wind made noises that were nearly audible as words. Attempting to dispel the nagging anxiety, I retrieved my belongings from the trunk. The intended hiding spot for the key was beneath a potted plant near the entrance, preferably one of those inauthentic pebbles that managed to fool no one. It wasn't hard for me to locate it, even though the rock had an unusually warm texture, warmer than it ought to have been, even in the rays of the Hawaiian sun. The unusual quiet was broken only by the sound of the locks turning. I noticed that there were no birdsong. Don't you think tropical islands should be teeming with bird songs? There was a creaking sound as the door slid wide, like something out of a horror film. The light was low, and the air smelled of sea salt and an odor, musty scent that I couldn't quite identify. As I groped for the switch, the light bulb's yellow light began to flicker on and off, sweeping the hardwood floors in a lengthy shadow. The room that appeared to be the master bedroom had a king-sized bed, an ensuite bathroom, and some unclean windows that promised ocean views, so I threw my stuff in there. The bedsheets were fresh and white, like a hospital bed, but they didn't quite fit the generally lived-in vibe of the room. I figured I'd perform a fast walkthrough before unpacking, as I was exhausted from the trip, even though it looked strangely out of place in Hawaii. The house was warm and inviting enough with the fireplace I'd seen in the pictures. There was a kitchen with granite counters and stainless steel appliances straight out of a food show. And there was a dining room with seating for 6, though I seriously doubt that many people would be able to squeeze into that room. I went to the kitchen to get some water because the journey had left my throat parched. quietly. The refrigerator hummed. It was almost as if it was attempting to blend in, so silently. I opened it, and the light within blinked twice before becoming a constant light. Aside from a few condiments and an unlabeled bottle of white wine, it was nearly empty. I noticed it at that moment. On the inside of the door was a weathered envelope. I convinced myself that the black stains on the borders were simply water damage. It bore my name, Steve, in beautiful cursive, the kind that schools no longer teach, and looked great. I gazed at it for what felt like an eternity, my index finger teetering on the edge of contact. As an insurance adjuster, I know all too well that unsolicited letters almost always contain terrible news. However, this was a holiday. This was meant to be my way out. At last, the craving for knowing more prevailed. After noticing that the paper felt off in some way, I removed the envelope from the door. Very thick, nearly leathery, on the inside. There was a folded sheet of paper that appeared somewhat more recent than the envelope. I unfolded the paper and heard a noise that seemed out of place in the otherwise peaceful house, a crackling sound. Consistent with the envelope, the handwriting was exacting, almost mechanically flawless. Please tell me, Steve, how long have you had this envelope sitting here? This was the second part of the letter. Your week-long stay at this Airbnb is greatly appreciated. Before you arrive, please read the guidelines so that your stay is enjoyable. Principle 1. Our household is not staffed by a female housekeeper. Do not open the door if a towering woman dressed in a maroon dress approaches your door and claims to be the maid. First, choose a safe place to hide, ideally one that you can lock in case the woman comes back the following day. Second rule, the maximum amount of time open food can be left in the fridge is 2 days. Thirdly, you shouldn't stress out if you find a man in your kitchen in the middle of the night. He is expected to depart by morning. Fourth rule, stay indoors once the sun sets. Fifth rule, notify the number on the refrigerator if you observe a child playing in the pool. It will be taken care of by someone they send. No. 6. As you ascend the stairs and behold a small child cradling a teddy bear, proceed to enter the first door on your left. Retrieve a toy from the box, set it down in front of the girl, and subsequently descend the stairs for 15 minutes. After then, it won't be a problem. Number 6. You should flee if the girl remains. Section 7. No matter how strange the noises, you should never enter the attic. That beautiful signature came to a close. The note, the proprietor best regards. My pulse rate increased with each reading, so I read it 3 times. Surely someone was joking about this, the owner's eccentric style of making guest stays unforgettable, or perhaps the locals' idea of teasing visitors. However, I failed to grasp the intended humor. Regret was like a lead weight descending into my gut. My more analytical mind attempted to make sense of things by recalling past experiences with insurance claims and mortgage payments. Perhaps it was an odd method of warning about the area fauna or trespassers. Perhaps it was a liability issue. However, a nagging suspicion that something more was afoot persisted in a more archaic region of my mind, which recalled my aversion to the dark. I reached for my phone, ready to give the owner a call and either demand an explanation or end my stay. Missing signal. Sure thing, in my quest to find even a single bar of reception. I paced the house with my phone held aloft like a digital divining rod. Under no circumstances. The doorbell rang at that very moment. I jumped so violently that I dropped my phone. The noise was like a gunshot in the peaceful house. It squeaked on the wooden floor as the screen flashed with the no service notice, which now appeared to taunt me. This time it's a louder ring. I approached the front door with caution, my steps muted on the weathered floorboards that had previously squeaked beneath my weight. A classic brass peephole, the kind that gives you a distorted perspective of the world, served as the peephole. It allowed me to see her, true to form. The regulations called for a towering woman to wear a maroon gown. Her face was concealed, with an archaic-looking wide-brimmed hat. Standing motionless with her hands clasped in front of her, she patiently awaited anything. Subsequently, she rapped me 3 times, a sound that shook my very being. Her speech was as polite and businesslike as a flight attendant's as she greeted the man. "It is I, the maid. I've come to tidy up the house." I kept thinking about rule number 1. Stop, the door is open. I tried to maintain a steady voice and called back, thinking there must have been an error. No mention of a maid service was made to me. She took a while to reply. The only sounds that interrupted the long expanse of solitude were my own breathing and the faraway crash of waves, which seemed incredibly distant at the moment. At long last, she spoke up, her voice now lower and coarser as if she were struggling to recollect how to sound human. "Sir," she said, "some housekeeping is in order. It is time to tidy the house. Please, let me in." The previously courteous tapping stopped, and then the knocking started up again, like a pulse. This beating was unrelenting and rhythmic. With every strike, the door trembled in its frame, and I tripped over the rug, causing my heel to seize. My lungs were drained of breath when I landed with a thud. It seemed like hours, but was really just minutes of beating. Afterwards, it came to a halt just as abruptly as it had begun. Terrified to move, terrified to breathe, I laid on the floor. After that, there was complete quiet. Nothing at all, not even the faintest sound of a refrigerator hum. Nothing at all. It seemed like a lifetime before I mustered up the nerve to peer through the peephole once more. Nothing occupied the porch. I walked around the house for the next hour, checking each window and lock. Even after entering the house's Wi-Fi password in the welcome package, my phone continued to display no signal. Ensnared in this house, with its peculiar regulations, and whomever had purported to be a housekeeper, had essentially sealed me off from the outer world. Getting in that battered Civic and driving till I refound civilization would have been the rational thing to do, yet I was halted in my tracks, possibly a mix of pride and curiosity, or perhaps something else entirely. I finally found what I had been looking for ever since I stumbled onto that unbelievable listing. The oppressive humidity had set in by the time the sun had set. The air conditioner in the house was barely turning on, and the warm air it pushed around felt like it was going to cling to my skin. Despite everything that had transpired, the idea of going for a swim became irresistible. From my bedroom window, I could see a pool, and it seemed like the perfect place to escape the heat and my mounting anxiety. After changing into my swimsuit, I went to the restroom to retrieve a towel, which had a subtle mothball scent, and then I went out back, surrounded by concrete that had seen better days. The pool appeared smaller from above, with a kidney form. Under the late afternoon sun, the water appeared invitingly blue, yet it was clear. It was the ideal temperature, so I dipped my toe in. I tried to drown out the image of the woman in the maroon dress by swimming laps before long. For a brief moment, I could almost think that this was simply another ordinary vacation thanks to the pleasant, ordinary water. At that moment, I beheld him. He showed up silently and without provocation. Seated cross-legged at the pool's edge is a young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. In the sunshine, his pale skin seemed practically see-through as he sported only red swim trunks. My heart skipped a beat, though, because of his eyes, like dusty marbles put into a doll's face. They were vacant and unfocused, his head cocked, at an angle that betrayed his human form as he either glanced at me or flung me. My body became limp as my feet hit the pool floor. The fifth rule screamed at me from the top of my head. Dial the number on the refrigerator. If you see a child in the pool. The youngster's cranium drooped so low that his ear was almost touching his shoulder far lower than it ought to have been. There was silence while his lips fluttered. I leaped out of the pool and dashed towards the house, the water gushing down my body. I dashed to the kitchen without using the towel, my wet footprints tracing over the hardwood floor. There was a yellow sticky note with the number on it. Even if the ink has faded a bit, it is still readable. Calling on the landline made me nervous because I wasn't sure it would go through. Yes, it did. Making contact on the very first ring. "Is that you?" It seemed as if someone had been waiting for my call. The voice was sharp and businesslike, so I fumbled my greeting as water continued to trickle down the floor. "Greetings, I am Steve. I am currently at Airbnb. Someone is playing near the pool." The subsequent hush was oppressive, carrying unspoken wisdom. Afterwards, a soothing yet authoritative voice came back. "Pay close attention. Every window and door must be locked. In no event should you glance outdoors. Someone will be at your location soon. Press the button. A dead end was reached. I hurriedly went through the home, drawing every curtain and checking every lock. I resisted the temptation to peek out the window as I walked past the ones that faced the pool. However, the essence of humans is formidable. I couldn't resist. At the last window, I gently raised one corner of the curtain, even though the lad had relocated. He remained present. He turned away from the house and stood at the pool's edge. The water trickled down his body, creating a flawless circle. At his feet, even though he hadn't been in the pool, seemingly aware of my stare, he started to pivot. My chest pounded as I drew aside the drape, my heart racing. Someone pushed the doorbell. I was taken aback for an instant. Return of the maroon-clad woman, two expressionless guys in black. Suits were seen via the peephole, though, instead of waiting for me to unlock the door, they just produced a key and walked right in. Without uttering a word, they moved with the precision of seasoned professionals. While the other remained at the door, one made a beeline for the backyard. I noticed that they were holding various pieces of equipment, things that seemed militaristic, but were actually quite strange, like technology from another era. Sitting on the couch, my damp swimming trunks seeping into the upholstery, I listened to noises emanating from the backyard that I couldn't place. A high-pitched wail that gnashed my teeth once replaced what sounded like a child's laughter, but was suddenly muted. They waited outside for 2 hours before coming back inside. There was a noticeable change in appearance for the one who had visited the pool. His suit appeared to be dry, but it had inexplicable wrinkles. A thin trickle of blood-like fluid was seen running from his nostril. He spoke in a robotic, flat tone, saying it's safe now. The door clicked shut behind them as they silently departed. I patiently waited for their vehicle to recede before casting my gaze out the window. The water remained unmoved, its blue hue retaining its allure. However, there was not a ripple in the sea, surprisingly so, as though the Hawaiian heat hadn't melted its surface. I felt like the house was watching me ever since the pool incident. With each stream, there seems to be hidden meaning in every shadow and reflection in the windows. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a kaleidoscope of orange and red hues painted the walls, giving them an unsettling appearance reminiscent of dried blood. I was hungry, but the idea of making dinner turned me off. Following the regulations regarding the refrigerator, I was unsure if I wanted to bring any food in with me, so I didn't. However, I was still obligated to verify the availability of supplies. A peculiar collection of objects was exposed when the kitchen cupboards were opened. Things in cans whose labels were so old that I couldn't make out the words. Despite their fresh appearance, the cracker boxes included expiration dates that were 3 years old. Plus, there was that one box of cereal that made an unusual noise. For cereal, the thought of being hungry was more appealing than whatever was in the cabinets. So I shut them. As the sun began to drop, the fourth rule resounded in my mind: stay indoors once the sun goes down. As I peered out the kitchen window, I beheld the sun setting behind the trees. What followed was an unusually deep and dense blackness, almost liquid-like, despite the fact that the time showed 8:47 p.m. My phone continued to show no connectivity. I turned on the TV to pass the time in the hours leading up to morning. When I switched it on, though, all but one channel displayed static. Apparently vintage cartoons were being played by a nearby station. Their demeanor, though, seemed strange. I felt like the figures were following me around the room. Their eyes were too jerky, and their voices were slightly off-key. I turned it off in a flash. As night fell, the home began to make sounds, some familiar, like an old building's creaks and groans, but others I couldn't place. It sounded like someone was walking around in the attic. 7. No matter how loud the noises, you should never enter the attic. From upstairs, occasionally, very faintly, you can hear what sounds like fingernails on glass, like the sound of a child laughing. Once again, I looked at the time, 8:23 p.m. for an instant. The computer screen flashed what appeared to be bizarre symbols before settling back into the usual numerical format. I thought I'd give sleeping a go. The time would fly by if I were unconscious, at least. It was difficult to fall asleep. The bed provided adequate comfort. However, whenever my attention began to wander, a sudden, unfamiliar sound would Snap me back to the present. Even though the sound of the waves lapping on the coast should have been relaxing, something about their cadence made it sound like they were sending a message through Morse code. I got some sleep at some point, but it was the kind of slumber that makes you feel even more exhausted in the morning. I had a dream about the boy from the pool, but in my dream, his head continued spinning until it looked like a hideous corkscrew. At precisely 3:33 a.m., I was startled awake. The bedside clock showed a furious red light for the digits. The sound of something downstairs had roused me from my slumber. As I lay in the dark, I listened to the sound of my own heartbeat. It seemed like someone was rustling around in the kitchen. Principle 3. No need to stress out if you find a man in your kitchen when you wake up in the middle of the night. He is expected to depart by morning. My body begged me to remain in bed, to lie down and wait for the sun to come up, just like a little kid. However, I was compelled to get information, necessitated a look. I skulked to the bedroom door, flinching at the sound of the floor's minuscule creaks. From the kitchen, a glimmer of light leaked up the stairs into the dimly lit corridor. Bioluminescence or any other gentler, more natural light source, not artificial illumination. I descended the steps cautiously, holding to the wall to muffle the most deafening creaks. The light intensified as I drew near the kitchen, bathing everything in a bland, icky blue. Indeed, he was present. He wore what appeared to be an antique suit as he stood behind the counter, facing away from me. Impressively, he stood at a height. He is abnormally skinny and towering above everyone. He seemed to be making something on the counter, but his movements were all wrong, jerky like a marionette. Calm yourself. By daybreak, he will have left. I began to gradually withdraw. I must have made a little sound, though, because he froze. I mean, really, stopped, totally still, like in a snapshot. His head slowly started to turn after that. I bolted. Putting the cacophony aside for the moment, make your way back up the stairs, one flight at a time. I hid beneath the covers and closed the door to my bedroom as my heart felt like it was going to explode. I lay there, trembling, trying to make out the sound of approaching feet. There was no rival of anything. The sunbeams were bursting through the windows the second I realized I had slept off again. I gingerly made my way downstairs, my throat parched and in dire need of water. Nothing had changed from the day before. The kitchen was deserted. However, if one teacup sat on the counter, its contents obscured by the morning light as they steamed softly. Accompanying it was a message penned in the identical flawless script. It was inappropriate for you to gaze. I sat about in a trance all morning, the teacup on the counter serving as a continual reminder that what was happening wasn't merely in my head. As I emptied it down the toilet, I noticed an iridescent film forming on the inside, which curled up and eventually vanished. The time continued to display implausible figures like 2561, and my phone continued to report no signal, but it also jumped forward and backward by hours. As far as accurate timekeeping goes, I had given up on it. Either the sun was moving across the sky at an abnormally rapid pace, or the dread and lack of sleep had distorted my sense of time. Whatever the case may be, nightfall arrived much earlier than expected. Rule 4 kept ringing in my head while I gathered necessities like food, water, and perhaps a weapon. It was becoming dark quickly, so I wouldn't recommend going outside. After that, I figured it would be a good idea to give the house one last once-over before nightfall in case I missed anything that could shed light on what was going on. My disastrous error occurred at that moment. Upstairs I went. Right at the end of the hall stood she. The girl had pigtails that dangled at somewhat varied lengths, and she was probably round 6 or 7 years old. The teddy bear she held in her fist had an odd appearance. Its proportions were awry, and its button eyes reflected an imaginary light. Her gaze, though, was what really stopped me in my tracks. Black, gaping chasms that appeared to absorb all surrounding light. As my anxiety levels rose, Rule 6 took effect. As you ascend the stairs and behold a small child cradling a teddy bear, proceed to enter the first door on your left, retrieve a toy from the box, set it down in front of the girl, and subsequently descend the stairs for 15 minutes. The left-hand entryway, I gently spun around, making sure to maintain the girl in the periphery of my eye. There was a door. even though I thought this corridor was set out differently in the past. Reaching for the knob, my hand trembled. The adjacent room was as tiny as a cupboard and devoid of any furniture, with the exception of a cardboard box sitting in the middle. Age, water stains, and corner softness gave the box an unappealing appearance. Countless toys, some of which appeared to be decades old and slightly off, were contained there. The toy car had windows that gave the impression of real darkness inside, and the doll had an excessive number of fingers. A wooden train that seemed feverishly hot when touched. As soon as my fingers made contact with the object, a tiny boat fashioned from what seemed like bone instead of wood was mine. I was not going to be particular about the type of toy to use, since Rule 6 hadn't mentioned it. Upon my exit, the girl remained still, however. She subsequently turned to face me, her neck twisted at an inexplicable angle, without looking straight into her face. I set the bone boat down at her feet and retreated toward the stairs. Get out of here, even though my gut told me not to. I dragged myself outside nevertheless, redescending the flight of stairs, heading into the family room. As my heart pounded in my chest, I slumped onto the couch and glanced at the time. In 15 minutes. It took me no more than 15 minutes. Minutes dragged slowly. Every sound in the house had vanished. Not a single sound, not even the faint hum of the fridge, has ever been heard. There was complete silence save for the sound of my own breathing and the seeming slowing of my watch. Just 14 minutes. The stillness became more oppressive, squeezing my ears. 13 minutes. Was it a murmur emanating from the upper floor? It will take 12 minutes. There was a feeling that the light was fading in the room, even though sunset shouldn't have happened yet. About 10 minutes. It was clear that the humming had grown louder. Moreover, it now had a tune, a warped cover of a lullaby that I nearly recognized. 8 minutes. The mercury was falling. Watching my breath was a sight. Just 5 minutes. Something dragging across the floor upstairs replaced the sudden cessation of the buzzing. Only 3 minutes. Signs of movement, tracing the stairs with delicate, gentle footfalls. Just 2 minutes. At the base of the staircase, they came to a halt. I didn't take my gaze off my watch. Hold on a second. Some creature was moving in my behind. End of time. I glanced away from my wristwatch. She remained the same. No. 6A. You should flee if the girl remains. I sprinted towards the front door, fiddling with the locks as I went. The girl behind me squealed, not the chuckle of a youngster, but rather an older sound, like the scrape of metal against bone. At last, the door swung open, and I sprinted out onto the porch. Upon horrified realization, I realized the sun had already set.